Well, I remember where I was. I was in our study at home on the computer, paying bills, just doing some routine business, and the phone rang at the house, and it was my mother-in-law, who lives in Rome but had the TV on at her house. And she said, "This is why I don't want you people ever moving to New York City." Out of the blue. I'm like, "Good morning. I don't know what you're talking about." Then she started to explain. I turned on the TV, saw the Today Show, saw the first plane had been into the building, and realized this was a big deal. And started thinking, I got to go to work. I think work called, but that wasn't needed. I was already on my way and gathering my things when I saw the second plane hit live on television. So I had gathered my things. I had a little portable TV. My wife was out walking the dog, and it was primary day. It was sunny. It was chilly out. It was a beautiful day. She was walking up the street. I'm zipping down the street in the car. I stopped. I showed her the image on the TV. I said, you know, New York City's under attack. We don't know exactly why, but I'm going to work. And she's like, go, go, go. I understand, you know. And she went home, and I went into the TV station.
And then when you got there, what was the mood like? What was the activity like?
Well, it was frightening. It was legitimately frightening. We didn't know what was going to happen next. We knew the two planes hit New York, and then somewhere in that timing, that unfolding of things, there was the concern for Washington, D.C., the plane hitting the Pentagon, then something happening in Pennsylvania that was unexplained initially. And I recall having a meeting in our television station with management, and our news director was away and couldn't get back, and our general manager saying, I've just heard that there could be another plane still in the air from some source that he had. Somewhere in there, we also knew that the 174th fighter wing out of Syracuse had sent jets up towards New York City. We later learned that they were one of the first on the scene and couldn't quite get there in time to intercept a plane, unfortunately, that hit the towers. But the mood instantly in our newsroom was very serious, very grave, getting everybody in to cover whatever we needed to cover. And one thing that I remember that is easy to forget was that as these towers were burning on television, nobody thought they were going to collapse. But we did presume there would be a lot of casualties. And then when the building started to collapse, we presumed there'd be even more casualties, by the thousands. So we were in touch with the mayor of Syracuse, Upstate Hospital. Upstate Hospital is a emergency trauma center. They were ready to accept patients from New York City, presuming that New York would be overwhelmed with patients and would need assistance. Sadly, that never materialized. That it turned into either you made it out or you were dead and virtually incinerated by the virtue of the buildings collapsing and then the fires that were going on in addition, the intensity of the flame. So we were trying to find any local angle that we could to the story, find people that were stranded. But I distinctly also remember the emotion in the newsroom being very, very unsettling. Newsrooms are generally a place where even in the gravest of moments, there's humor and dark jokes, and that's kind of how we get through that. This was not a day for that, and I can picture one of our producers, Ray Fulkerson, who is our news director here, crying, and out of concern, what's going to happen next. We obviously sent reporters to the airport where the flights have been grounded from out of town in some cases, trying to figure out how people were going to get back to central New York. And then, as a reporter, as an anchor, you try to find ways to kind of shut off your emotion because you need to tell the story and share that story with viewers. And I remember being able to do that, but what really struck me I can't recall for certain whether it was day 2 or 3, but when we learned that Mark Morabito's wife was on the first plane of the first tower, she was seated right behind one of the terrorists. I didn't know Mark at the time, but he became a familiar face, became a friend, and he was in the same age range as me. His wife was a similar age range, and she was killed, and I remember seeing him, and finally that's the moment that really hit home, that I remember the stories playing on our monitors in our studio, and I just had to look away, like, think about something else, because that's when the tears that were kind of hidden, being held back for a couple days, they felt like they wanted to come out. It was just so sad once you start to see the personal nature of a tragedy that starts out as a mass tragedy, but it's really not. There's no such thing. It's really a series of individual tragedies that really were memorable and really compelling and hard to understand. And it turned out to be just a week of the oddest week that I can remember, certainly as an adult. No planes flying in the air, at work at the TV station for hours and on end. I don't even recall when I went home that night, or if it wasn't until the next day. And trying to sort out what was going on and what was going to happen next. Great uncertainty as to would there be another shoe to drop beyond these, as if there wasn't enough, but beyond New York, the Pentagon, and then we found out the plane had been taken down in Pennsylvania, but was there still something else? What else did these terrorists plan, and who was Al-Qaeda, and what was the country going to do,
Right.
But I also remember too, as kind of as our job, much of the time we were just experiencing it with our viewers too. There wasn't a second where there were no commercials. But even when we were telling a local story, if we had the mayor Matt Driscoll was mayor and ended up benefiting an election basis from this attack, oddly enough, because it was a primary day, and they canceled the primaries, and he had ascended to be the mayor because he was the council president, and Roy Bernardi had gone to Washington. So by the time the primary came around a few weeks later, people just said, well, he's the mayor, we're going to keep him as the mayor instead of the other contender. It was Kate O'Connell. But even when we were telling stories of locally connected stories, how's this affecting us? What's our emergency response? How are we helping people in New York City? We always had on the video from New York or from the Pentagon or from Pennsylvania playing at the same time, and we sat and watched the buildings collapse one after another, essentially live on the air. And then we'd give it, the network would take over and do its coverage for long periods of time, but we wanted to keep telling the local angle to it as well. But even as we did that, we would keep the feed going, and it was challenging to experience the tragedy, the disaster, the sadness of it all, and the horror and the shock, along with the people who were watching us for information. We were every bit as much part of the viewers as they were, as we were learning what was going on there.
And, it happened in New York City, obviously the worst in New York City, the Pentagon in Pennsylvania, but it was kind of like, even we're central New York, upstate New York, it still was, at that time, everybody's a New Yorker and had this feeling of supporting, it impacted the whole state.
It did impact the whole state, and it impacted the country, although I still think, and especially since then as I went and covered more stories and talked to more people and was there on the first anniversary, I was at Ground Zero, the first anniversary of 9/11, and saw the thousands of family members who had been orphaned or lost a sibling or a child or a spouse that day, and the numbers were just catastrophic. And I remember wondering if everybody throughout America felt as much of the pain as New Yorkers did. I think I agree that I think New Yorkers, including all of New York State, felt it even more than probably places otherwise did. But there was a great unification of the country and of New York City, for that matter. If you think about it politically, Rudy Giuliani was in the last months of his administration. He had not been that popular at that point as mayor of New York City, but his popularity went through the roof because he was exactly the guy that needed to be there when this happened. He did all the right things. He led the city out of this despair. And George Bush, who was a new president at the time, again, similarly, really took the reins and did a terrific job in terms of leading the country and saying the right things and doing the right things, and ultimately leading the country into war in Afghanistan, which isn't completely wrapped up 17 years later, which is really remarkable. But as America is pretty good at doing, we tend to come together when the worst things happen, and the country did, and certainly New Yorkers did, and I think Central New York felt that as much as anybody.